The moment Grandma Beatrice's will reading began, my cousin Zoe shot to her feet and pointed straight at me. "She's a thief," she said loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. And the worst part? No one argued. Faces around the table tightened with the kind of quiet agreement that tells you they've already made up their minds. I thought the verdict was sealed, until the estate lawyer, Mr. Sterling, leaned forward and calmly said the inheritance would go to the person who helped catch the real thief. Then he opened a file labeled security footage. To understand why that room went silent, you have to go back 3 years. Because the truth is, while everyone else in the family was living their lives somewhere far away, I was here every weekend for 36 months straight. Not sipping tea with Grandma Beatrice, not making polite small talk, working. Her library wasn't just another room in the brownstone. It was an entire world, packed behind dark wooden shelves, rare manuscripts, first editions, handwritten notes from historians long gone. Some of the books dated back centuries, and together, the collection was worth well over $1 million. But when I first started helping her, the room was chaos. Stacks of uncatalogued volumes, fragile bindings, papers tucked between pages where they didn't belong, valuable pieces of history sitting in the wrong temperature, the wrong humidity, slowly deteriorating. Grandma didn't ask me to fix it. I volunteered. And once I started, I treated the job the way a real archivist would. White cotton gloves every time I handled a book. No shortcuts, no rushing. If a page looked fragile, I stopped. If a binding looked like it might crack, I researched how to support it properly before touching it again. Little by little, the system started to take shape. I built a digital database from scratch. Every book, every manuscript, every map logged into a searchable archive. Title year, provenance, physical condition, estimated market value. I photographed fragile pages, documented damage, noted which volumes needed restoration and which ones needed climate control. Over time, I started to recognize the collection the way a mechanic recognizes the sound of an engine. I could spot the difference between a water stain and chemical damage. I knew which leather spines were beginning to dry out. I knew which shelves received too much afternoon sunlight. And every time I added another entry to the archive, it felt like preserving a tiny piece of the past. Meanwhile, the rest of the family had very different priorities. Zoe was posting glossy photos from Milan, curating her brand, chasing followers and fashion deals. Her life looked like a highlight reel of rooftop parties and luxury boutiques. Uncle Gregory was busy chasing his own kind of dream, burning through venture capital on tech startups that never quite worked. Every few months, there was a new pitch, a new project, a new promise that the next one would finally pay off. Neither of them visited much, and when they did, they didn't see what I saw. Where I saw history, they saw inventory. Where I saw fragile pages worth protecting, they saw price tags waiting to be cashed in. Back then, I used to think they resented me because they thought I was trying to impress Grandma. Like I was angling for favoritism or trying to secure a bigger piece of the inheritance. But standing there during the will reading, listening to Zoe accuse me, I realized something colder. My work wasn't the problem. The problem was what my work revealed. Every weekend, I showed up every book I preserved, every record I added to that database. It quietly proved something they didn't want to face. That while they were chasing money somewhere else, someone had actually stayed behind to protect what mattered. For a long time, I misunderstood why Zoe and Uncle Gregory looked at me the way they did. I used to think it was simple jealousy. Maybe they believed I was trying to win Grandma's favor, positioning myself as the dutiful granddaughter who deserved the inheritance. From their perspective, I probably looked like the quiet kid sitting in the front row of class, raising her hand while everyone else rolled their eyes. But standing there in the library that day, listening to Zoe shout about stolen ledgers and betrayal, something finally clicked into place. It wasn't jealousy. It was something colder. To Zoe and Gregory, the library had never been a sanctuary of knowledge. It wasn't a living archive of history or a lifetime of careful collecting. To them, those shelves were a warehouse, a storage room full of assets waiting to be liquidated. Rare manuscripts meant auction catalogs. First editions meant dollar signs, maps, atlases, handwritten journals. Those were just inventory. And every weekend that I showed up with my white gloves and spreadsheets, I was quietly interfering with that future. At first I thought they hated the work itself, but that wasn't it either. What they hated was the mirror. There's a concept psychologists talk about called a narcissistic injury. It happens when someone's self-image gets threatened not by insults, but by comparison. By the uncomfortable realization that someone else is quietly proving them wrong just by existing. That was what I had become. Every time I cataloged another manuscript, it highlighted the fact that they hadn't stepped foot in the house for months. Every time I stabilized a damaged spine or corrected a record in the database, it reminded them that they didn't even know what was on those shelves anymore. I never said a word about it, but my competence spoke loudly enough, and people who build their identity on entitlement don't handle that feeling well. They can't sit with it, they can't admit it. The reflection is too painful. So they destroy the mirror. That's when their plan started to make sense. Framing me wasn't just about getting me out of the house. If they'd simply asked me to leave, Grandma would have noticed. Questions would have been asked. Suspicion might have fallen on them. No, they needed something cleaner. They needed me discredited. If I was exposed as a thief, suddenly everything would flip. My careful records would become part of a scam. My weekends in the library would look like reconnaissance. My entire reputation would collapse overnight. And once I was gone, once the criminal archivist had been removed, they could step in as the responsible heirs who had uncovered the betrayal. It was brilliant in a twisted kind of way. Plant evidence, create outrage, stage the accusation in front of the whole family. That fake black market ledger they slipped into my bag wasn't random. It was designed to look exactly like the kind of records someone would keep while secretly selling rare books under the table. Then all they had to do was wait for the will reading. A public setting, witnesses everywhere, maximum humiliation. Zoe would stand up, point her perfectly manicured finger at me, and announce that she had discovered proof I'd been stealing from the collection. Once the ledger was found in my bag, the story would write itself. I'd be the greedy archivist who spent 3 years cataloging the library, only so I could slowly sell pieces of it off in secret. They wouldn't just remove me, they would erase me. My work, my reputation, my relationship with Grandma gone in a single accusation. And the most chilling part, they looked genuinely proud of the plan. As Zoe ranted across the table that morning, calling me a criminal, calling me a liar, I realized something strange. I wasn't afraid anymore, because suddenly the entire situation made perfect sense. While I had spent 3 years preserving history, they had spent those same 3 years slowly revealing their character. And somewhere along the way, Grandma Beatrice had seen it too. The room was already tense when Mr. Sterling reached for his laptop. Zoe was still standing, voice sharp with outrage, pacing beside the long mahogany table like a prosecutor who had already won her case. She kept pointing at me, repeating the same accusations: black market sales, stolen books, hidden ledgers, as if saying them loudly enough would make them true. Mr. Sterling didn't interrupt her. He didn't argue. He simply waited. When she finally ran out of breath, he turned the laptop toward the large display screen mounted on the wall of the library. The soft click of the cable sliding into place sounded strangely loud in the silence that followed. The screen flickered. A cold blue glow washed across the shelves of old leather-bound books. Mr. Sterling navigated through a series of folders with calm, deliberate movements. No theatrics, no rush. Just a quiet patience that made Zoe's frantic energy look even more unstable. Then he stopped on a single file. The label was simple: The Sting. He double-clicked. The video filled the screen. At first, the image was still just a clear view of the very same library we were standing in now. The timestamp in the corner read 3 weeks earlier. Then the door opened. 2 figures stepped inside, Zoe and Uncle Gregory. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. On screen, Gregory looked nervous. He kept glancing over his shoulder, wiping sweat from his forehead as if the walls themselves might be watching him. Zoe, on the other hand, looked completely relaxed. She walked straight toward the chair where my work bag sat on the floor. "Are you sure she's not coming back?" Gregory whispered on the recording. His voice carried through the speakers, sharp and unmistakable. "Relax," Zoe replied with a dismissive laugh. "She's in the archive room dusting maps. The little mouse won't notice a thing." My stomach tightened as I watched the scene unfold. Zoe crouched beside my bag and unzipped the side pocket. From inside her coat, she pulled out a small leather-bound book. The fake ledger? Even from across the room, I recognized it instantly. "Hurry up," Gregory hissed. "If she catches us, the whole plan falls apart." Zoe rolled her eyes. "Please," she said. "Once the police find this thing in her bag, she'll be out on the street. Then we can finally sell the collection." She slipped the ledger into my bag and zipped the pocket shut. "I already have a buyer lined up for the first editions," she added casually. Gregory let out a nervous laugh. Zoe stood, brushed invisible dust off her coat, and gave him a high five. Both of them laughed, then slow, smug laughter that echoed through the speakers. The kind of laugh people make when they think they've gotten away with something clever. Then they walked out of frame. The video ended. No one in the room moved. The silence was so heavy it felt like the air had thickened. I turned slightly and looked at Zoe. Her face had drained of color. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite figure out how to breathe. Then the panic hit. "That's fake," she blurted suddenly. Her voice cracked as she stepped forward, pointing wildly at the screen. "That's a deepfake. You doctored that footage." No one answered. "You manipulated it," she continued, desperation climbing higher with every word. "Grandma didn't even know how to use a camera system like that. She was senile. Someone here edited that video." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support. But the expressions she found weren't sympathetic. They were stunned, and slowly, quietly, the weight of what they had just seen began to settle over everyone in the library. Zoe had spent the last 10 minutes trying to convince the room that I was a thief. But now the screen behind her was showing something much simpler: the truth. The silence after the video ended felt almost physical. Zoe was still breathing hard, her eyes darting between the frozen screen and the faces around the table, waiting for anyone to defend her version of events. No one did. Mr. Sterling slowly closed the laptop. The sharp click of the lid snapping shut echoed through the library like the closing of a judge's gavel. For the moment, he said calmly, folding his hands on the table, let us set the video aside. His tone was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that somehow made the situation feel even more serious. Then he opened a thick file that had been sitting in front of him the entire time. Instead, he continued sliding a document forward. We should discuss the inventory. Zoe blinked. Gregory shifted in his chair. The inventory, he repeated cautiously. Yes, Mr. Sterling said. Specifically 2 items that disappeared from this library 3 weeks ago. He lifted a sheet of paper and read from it as if he were listing museum artifacts. A first edition of The Great Gatsby, and a 17th century celestial atlas. I felt a chill run through me. Those books had been part of the most valuable shelf in the room. Mr. Sterling looked up. Items that were sold, he added to a private buyer in New York for $42,000. Gregory's reaction was immediate. We didn't sell anything. He blurted, his voice rising too quickly. We were just securing assets. Securing assets, Mr. Sterling repeated slowly as though testing the phrase. Gregory nodded, leaning forward with forced confidence. Exactly. We were worried about theft. After all, he glanced briefly in my direction. There were already suspicions. Zoe seized the opening. Yes, she said quickly. We were protecting the estate. Grandma's collection is worth millions. We had every right to safeguard it. Mr. Sterling watched them both with mild curiosity, like a teacher listening to students explain why their homework had mysteriously vanished. Interesting, he said. He reached deeper into the folder and produced another document. Because according to the wire transfer records in front of me, the payment for those items did not enter the estate trust. The room grew still again. Mr. Sterling slid the page across the table. It went into a newly opened offshore account. Gregory's jaw tightened. Zoe's fingers curled against the edge of the table. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The account, he continued evenly, is registered under the name Zoe Chen Enterprises. Zoe straightened in her chair. So what, she snapped, trying to reclaim her confidence. It's our inheritance anyway. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. She crossed her arms. Grandma was just hoarding all of it, she continued. Millions of dollars sitting on dusty shelves while the rest of us were struggling to build our lives. Her voice carried that familiar edge of entitlement. Those books were worth a fortune, she said, and they were just sitting here. It's not like we took something that didn't belong to us. Gregory nodded quickly beside her. Exactly. It was an advance, that's all. Mr. Sterling leaned back slightly in his chair. For the first time since the meeting had started, the faintest trace of amusement appeared in his expression. Worth a fortune, he repeated thoughtfully. His eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment, and something passed between us, an understanding I couldn't quite name yet. Then he turned his attention back to Zoe and Gregory. That, he said slowly, is the most fascinating part of this entire situation. He tapped the file lightly with one finger. You see, your grandmother was not senile. The room seemed to hold its breath. She was suspicious. And suddenly, the tension in the library shifted again like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Mr. Sterling let that word hang in the air for a moment. Suspicious? You could almost hear the gears turning in everyone's head as they tried to understand what he meant. He opened the folder again and pulled out a second document. It looked like an ordinary invoice at first glance, paper from a printing company, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a business office, not inside a $1 million library. Several months ago, he said calmly, Your grandmother noticed something unusual. Zoe's shoulders stiffened. Gaps. Mr. Sterling gestured toward the shelves lining the walls. Small ones. Books that were no longer exactly where they were supposed to be. Volumes that had shifted positions. Items that had quietly disappeared and then sometimes reappeared. Gregory swallowed. The lawyer's voice remained steady, almost conversational. She didn't accuse anyone immediately. That would have required proof. He tapped the invoice lightly. And your grandmother was a historian. She dealt in evidence. He lifted the paper so the room could see it. 6 months ago, Beatrice commissioned a specialist in London. A master of reproduction. Someone capable of creating museum-quality facsimiles. The word landed slowly. Facsimiles. Across the table, Zoe blinked. I don't understand, she said, her voice tight. Mr. Sterling continued as if she hadn't spoken. She selected 12 of the most valuable items in this collection. The ones most likely to attract attention. I knew exactly which shelf he meant. I had cataloged those books myself. First editions, early atlases, rare volumes. Collectors would fight over at auctions. Each of those items, he said, was carefully replicated. High-quality copies, identical bindings, matching paper texture. Even the wear patterns along the spines were recreated. He paused. Once the reproductions were complete, your grandmother placed them back on the shelves. A quiet ripple of confusion passed through the room. And the originals, someone asked softly. Mr. Sterling folded his hands. The originals were transferred to a climate-controlled vault in Zurich. The silence that followed was crushing. I watched the realization begin to spread across Gregory's face first. His eyes widened slightly, and the color drained from his skin like someone had pulled a plug. Zoe shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. But Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. Beatrice did not create those facsimiles as bait, he said. At least, not in the way you might imagine. He looked around the room. She created them as mercy. That word sounded strange, coming from a lawyer in the middle of what was quickly turning into a legal disaster. She hoped her suspicions were wrong. He continued. She hoped that if someone noticed something valuable sitting on the shelf, they would choose to leave it alone. He paused, letting the meaning settle. A final test of character. Gregory leaned forward suddenly, panic starting to bleed through his voice. But the buyer verified them. He said quickly. He checked the bindings. He inspected the pages. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. Yes, a faint glimmer of something almost sympathetic crossed his face. That brings us to the buyer. Zoe's head snapped up. He confirmed they were real, she said. He said so himself. Mr. Sterling looked at her with calm patience. No, Miss Chen. He slid another paper across the table. The man who purchased those books was not a collector. Zoe's fingers trembled as she picked up the page. He was a private investigator. The words landed like a hammer. Hired by this firm. The room seemed to tilt for a second. He wasn't examining the books to confirm authenticity. Mr. Sterling continued quietly. He was examining them to see if you were willing to sell them. Zoe's lips parted, but no sound came out. Gregory sank back in his chair. So let me summarize, Mr. Sterling said gently. You removed items from this library that you believed to be worth tens of thousands of dollars. You transported them across state lines. You sold them to a buyer in exchange for $42,000. He paused, then added the final piece. Unfortunately for you, the items you sold were nothing more than high-quality reproductions. Across the table, Zoe looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under her. Her mouth moved silently, because the truth was finally clear. They hadn't stolen a fortune. They hadn't outsmarted anyone. They had simply revealed themselves. In their rush to cash in on the family legacy, they had walked straight into a trap built from their own greed. The books they sold weren't priceless treasures. They were paper and ink, and by selling them, Zoe and Gregory had exposed exactly what Grandma Beatrice had feared all along. The room had gone so quiet that even the old floorboards seemed to hold their breath. Zoe was staring at the documents in front of her like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into a different reality. Gregory looked hollow, his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him piece by piece. For a moment no one spoke. Then Mr. Sterling reached into his briefcase one last time. When he pulled his hand back out, he was holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with a small circle of red wax. The sight of it changed something in the room immediately. This, he said quietly, was left by Beatrice. His voice had softened. The sharp professional edge that had carried through the earlier revelations was gone, now replaced by something closer to respect. She asked me to read it only if the trap was triggered. He paused, glancing around the room. She was very clear about that condition. The envelope rested in his hand for a moment, almost like he was weighing it. She told me, if the books remained on the shelves, I was to burn this letter without opening it. No one moved. But if the books were gone, he continued, I was to read it to the family. The wax seal cracked with a small, brittle sound as he opened the envelope. In the silence of the library, it sounded impossibly loud. He unfolded the letter carefully, smoothing the paper across the table before beginning to read. My family, he said, and for a second, the cadence of the words sounded uncannily like Grandma herself. If you are hearing this letter, it means you have failed. The words fell heavy into the room. It means that when faced with a choice between preserving our history and selling it for parts, you chose the sale. Zoe let out a faint, broken breath. Mr. Sterling continued, I am writing this with a broken heart, not a vengeful one. I felt my chest tighten. For the past year, I have watched you, the letter said. I have watched how you look at this library and see only dollar signs. I have watched how you look at your cousin Savannah and see only an obstacle. My name hung in the air. Suddenly, all those quiet afternoons came rushing back to me, the ones where I thought Grandma had fallen asleep in her chair while I worked. Apparently, she hadn't been sleeping at all. I did not create this trap to catch you, Mr. Sterling read. I created it hoping it would remain empty. He paused slightly, letting the words settle before continuing. The facsimiles were not meant as bait. They were meant as mercy, a final chance. My throat tightened. I left them in plain sight, the letter said, so that anyone tempted might walk into this room, see something valuable, and choose to leave it where it belonged. Mr. Sterling looked down again. I prayed every night that this letter would never be opened. Zoe's shoulders began to shake quietly beside the bookshelf. I hoped my suspicions were simply the fears of an aging woman, the letter continued. But I am a historian. I deal in facts, not wishes. The room felt unbearably still. And the fact is this. You have begun to look at this family not as a legacy to protect, but as a carcass to feast upon. The words landed like a quiet verdict. Zoe covered her mouth, a choked sob slipping through her fingers. Mr. Sterling read on. I cannot leave my life's work to vultures. I cannot entrust the past to those who see only profit in it. He lifted his eyes, briefly scanning the room. The library, The estate and the trust are not rewards for sharing my blood. They are tools for preservation. Then his gaze shifted toward me. Therefore, he continued, if the books are gone, so is your inheritance. A long silence followed. You have sold your birthright for $42,000, the letter concluded. I hope it was enough. Mr. Sterling lowered the page slightly. There is a postscript, he said quietly. He turned the letter. This portion is addressed to Savannah. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. To my silent watchman he read, I am sorry that I could not protect you from their nature, but I could protect you from their schemes. My vision blurred. You never asked me for anything, the letter continued. And yet, you gave me everything. Your time, your patience, your care for the stories hidden in these pages. Mr. Sterling's voice softened further. You understood something the others never did. He read the final lines slowly. The true value of a book is not the price on its cover, but the words inside. A tear slid down my cheek before I even realized it. You were the only one who passed the test, the letter finished, because you were the only one who didn't know you were taking it. For a moment after the letter ended, no one spoke. The words seemed to linger in the air, drifting through the library like dust in sunlight. Zoe's quiet sobs were the only sound, thin and uneven, echoing against the tall shelves. Mr. Sterling carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. The warmth that had crept in while reading Grandma's words disappeared, replaced by something colder, professional, precise. Now, he said calmly, we must address the legal ramifications of what has occurred. Gregory stiffened. Zoe looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. But the books were fake, she blurted out quickly. Desperation sharpening her voice. You said so yourself. They weren't even real. We didn't actually steal anything valuable. Mr. Sterling leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. The law, he said, does not concern itself solely with outcomes. He paused. It concerns itself with intent. The word landed heavily. You entered this house, he continued, with the intent to remove property belonging to the estate. Property you believed to be worth tens of thousands of dollars. He opened the folder again and slid several documents across the table. You transported those items out of state. Another page followed. You arranged a private sale, then another, and you accepted $42,000 in exchange. Gregory's jaw clenched. That constitutes attempted grand larceny, Mr. Sterling said calmly, as well as fraud. Zoe shook her head wildly. But they were fakes, she insisted. You just told us they were copies. Yes, Mr. Sterling replied evenly, which introduces an additional complication. He tapped one of the documents. You also defrauded the buyer. Gregory suddenly leaned forward, seizing on the opening. The buyer was your guy, he snapped. You hired him. This whole thing was a setup. Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. Entrapment. Gregory continued quickly, his voice rising with fragile hope. That's illegal. You can't trick people into committing crimes. Mr. Sterling met his gaze without blinking. Entrapment applies to law enforcement, Mr. Chen, he said coolly. I am a private attorney executing the instructions of a private citizen. He paused, letting that sink in. And the officers, currently waiting in the foyer, are very interested in the wire transfer records related to this transaction. Gregory froze. Crossing state lines while selling stolen property introduces federal charges, Mr. Sterling added. Zoe's composure shattered. She pushed away from the bookshelf and stumbled toward me. Then, to everyone's shock, she dropped to her knees. "Savannah, please," she cried, grabbing the hem of my dress. "You can't let them arrest us." Her voice cracked with raw panic. "We're family," she said desperately. "We grew up together. This is insane. Just tell him to stop. Tell him it was a misunderstanding." Her fingers tightened against the fabric. "It was just a mistake." I looked down at her. This was the same cousin who had spent years mocking my clothes, my quiet life, my weekends in the library. The same person who had stood up 10 minutes earlier and accused me of being a criminal in front of the entire family. "You didn't treat me like family," I said, slowly. My voice trembled, but the words kept coming. "Not when you planted that ledger in my bag." Zoe's grip loosened slightly. "Not when you stood up in front of everyone and called me a thief." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "You were ready to send me to prison," I continued softly. "You were ready to destroy my entire life." Gregory stepped forward, then his expression tight with urgency. "Savannah," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "Think about what you're doing." He gestured toward the door. "Think about the scandal, the family name. Your grandmother wouldn't want this." The words hung there heavy with implication. Family, loyalty, obligation. For the first time since the meeting began, I felt the weight of something settle squarely on my shoulders. Because suddenly it was clear. The evidence was laid out. The trap had been sprung. The police were already waiting. But the final decision, that belonged to me. Gregory could see it happening. The shift, the moment where sympathy might slip out of the room entirely. So he tried one last move. "Look," he said quickly, stepping forward, hands raised like he was negotiating a business deal instead of the collapse of his own future. "We can fix this." His voice had that oily calm he used when pitching one of his startups. "Savannah, just think about what you're doing." Zoe was still on her knees beside me, crying quietly now, clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Gregory kept talking. "We made a mistake." "Fine. A huge mistake." He exhaled sharply. "But mistakes can be corrected." He gestured toward Mr. Sterling's stack of papers. "We can pay the $42,000 back. Zoe has connections. I've got investors. This doesn't have to turn into this." His eyes locked onto mine. "Just tell him to drop it." The desperation was showing now. "We'll sign whatever you want," he continued. "We'll walk away from the inheritance. You can have the library, the house, the trust, everything. Just don't let them arrest us." The room was still. Gregory leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Savannah, we're your only family." That word again. "Family. Beatrice is gone," he added quietly. "If you do this, if you send us to prison, you'll be completely alone." The sentence hung there like a weight dropped into water. "Who's going to help you run this place?" he continued. "Who's going to be there on holidays? Who's going to sit at the table with you?" He spread his hands. "You really want to spend the rest of your life by yourself in this house?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, my eyes drifted across the room, past Gregory, past Zoe, past the faces of relatives who suddenly seemed very interested in the floor. They landed on the old leather chair near the fireplace. Grandma's chair, the one she used to sit in every afternoon while I worked. The leather was worn into the shape of her body after decades of reading, thinking, watching. And suddenly something became very clear. Gregory thought he was threatening me with loneliness. But he was wrong, because Grandma hadn't left me alone. She had left me this: the library, the archive, the quiet, patient voices of every writer, historian, and thinker whose work filled these shelves. She had left me purpose, and more importantly, she had left me a choice. I finally looked back at Gregory. "Family," I said softly. Zoe lifted her head slightly. Gregory nodded, eager now. Yes, exactly. Family. I took a slow breath. You didn't treat me like family when you planted that ledger in my bag. Gregory's expression tightened. You didn't treat me like family when you stood in front of everyone and tried to send me to prison. Zoe's shoulders started shaking again. And you definitely didn't treat Grandma like family. I continued, my voice growing steadier, when you tried to carve up her life's work for quick cash. Gregory opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For years, I had believed family meant tolerance, keeping the peace, accepting the insults, the manipulation, the quiet cruelty, because blood was supposed to matter more than fairness. But standing there in that room, surrounded by the books Grandma had spent her entire life protecting, I finally understood something she had known all along. Family isn't about shared blood. It's about shared values. And the people in front of me didn't share those. They never had. They weren't guardians of the legacy. They were parasites feeding on it. If I let them walk away today, they wouldn't learn anything. They would simply find another place, another person, another opportunity to drain. Protecting the archive meant protecting it completely, even if that meant cutting away the parts that threatened it. I turned to Mr. Sterling. The tension in the room snapped tight like a wire pulled to its limit. Gregory stopped breathing. Zoe stared up at me through swollen eyes. They were waiting for the quiet girl, the forgiving girl, the one who smoothed things over. Instead, I heard my own voice say something else. Proceed as instructed. The words felt solid, final. Mr. Sterling nodded once, no hesitation. He reached into his jacket and tapped a button on his phone. A second later, the heavy oak doors of the library swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Behind them followed a plain-clothed detective already pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. They didn't need directions. The guilt in the room was obvious. Gregory Chen. Zoe Chen, the detective said firmly, you are under arrest for fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the library. Zoe screamed as the officers pulled her to her feet. Gregory didn't fight. He just sagged defeated as they guided him toward the door. And I stood there, watching in silence as the last pieces of the lie finally collapsed. 6 months later, the brownstone feels completely different. The silence isn't heavy anymore. It's peaceful. The sign outside now reads, the Beatrice and Savannah Archive, and 3 days a week, the doors are open to students, historians, and anyone who loves the quiet magic of old books. That's when it hit me. Real revenge isn't burning something down. It's building something stronger in its place. If this story meant something to you, leave a like, share it with someone who'd appreciate it, and tell me in the comments, what's something meaningful you've helped preserve